type stuff where you could like check out somebody, like even like a financial planner or something, like have somebody willing to like let their neighborhood or community members check out, slight altering their time to help them like figure out a budget, things like that. So Chris has some cool ideas. That's gonna be so great having them.
Are you wanting to do that?
Next week.
Building it, yeah.
Building it.
Yeah.
It's the idea.
Not so fun to do one, huh?
But
I haven't done it.
no, you just
Scott invited me.
Scott invited me. Yeah.
awesome.
So,
Yeah, so that's
Yeah, I
great.
don't know if he'll.
Yeah.
It's good.
We're
Yeah.
teaching the
Are you in sales too?
university classes.
Yeah.
I wasn't
We're like, anything finance that you could start with earlier, it's even better.
Yeah, we're trying to put some of those little like pawns on the board over there by having like the bike racks and things like that. And obviously then with from fresh opening, they're all about healthy digestive systems and they can be right here, permanent and all the things. So cool. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, these are actually chances for you.
We're coming together though.
So 440 and
Yeah.
46.
Yeah, well,
Is that
so we're teaching them
Hopkins,
the financial literacy too, it's our 4 to 5 year olds, so.
So
We'll see how
Woodbridge
that goes.
fans out there, yes. I'm on the
Yeah.
corner of the neighborhood, so literally if
Oh, good.
you're driving on 46 towards Walmart from.
So what's on this high school project, or is it still just kind of right now, we're trying to figure out which option is gonna be the best, and which one to take, or leave, and yeah, it's obviously this is gonna affect our girls, because, you know, we go stuff like, we have 3 girls and boys all at the same time, but if they're you know, I can try to do something else, so.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really like being in the neighborhood where.
Okay.
The other kids all
Promise?
market the community,
Yeah.
so.
Mitchell, okay. I knew it wasn't
So we end up solving.
What's the popcorn park?
Yeah, so once you put that out, then like, actually start doing that on it
I have a daughter.
Yeah, it's like a full tear down and rebuild right where they
It's a
sit.
different school corporation.
Yeah.
I used to work.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you can get like, they're gonna have land and everything already. It would just be, what do you do in the meantime, right? Maybe that's just all the kids go either west to go and south while Morris getting rebuilt and then do
Let's
the
go ahead
same,
and
get
get
away
this
around.
thing
Yeah.
started.
West People provides the greatest challenge.
Really?
Because of the small footprint that's there.
So
Yeah.
There's some things we can do it north and south with portable classrooms and those types of things that could offset some of that. So,
Yeah.
ready to go?
If you are, yeah. I think everyone here knows Dr. Rob Haworth, so I don't really need to do much of an introduction. But just so everyone's aware, we are running this as a hybrid meeting, so there will be people virtually. I'll handle all that from the laptop. If we have questions or anything like that, I'll kind of moderate that. So for anybody that's on there right now, I got you. And we are sharing your presentation via that, and this is being recorded. So just as everyone here knows, it is being recorded. We'll probably have this up on the Chamber's YouTube later this week.
Time frame?
We typically do about 20 to 30 minutes, but we've got an hour for the total thing. So, you know, if you take, you know, longer than
I
that.
can be windy, so I'll try to.
Sure. Sure. We'll have at it.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. I appreciate it. This is probably our 16th or 17th gathering. Some gatherings have had over 100 people, some have had 2. So we try to meet our community wherever they're at because we believe this is a very important topic. We believe this is a 50-year type of decision that's being made. So we were talking earlier, if you're expecting a child right now, you can imagine that graduation timeline is somewhere in the 2040 arena. This year's kindergarten student, I think, graduates in 2037. So when we think about discussion on our high schools, not just what we need right now, what's our hope for the future. Need to speak to that in context of
Get a seat.
And here, that my presentation has frozen.
Uh-oh.
So we're trying to work that out. One thing that you'll see on the slide that's important in this discussion is enrollment. Right now, as many of you may know, we're shrinking as a community. We're getting smaller. In 1983, I was a junior in high school, but it was happening here in Terre Haute. You could come and the mall was packed, and you could go to Service Merchandise, and you could go get your Rack's roast beef, and a lot of good things happening. We'll talk about that with you later. But since 1983, we had 18,000 students. We believe by 2030, we'll have 13,000 students. So we are getting smaller. So we have this discussion with regards to facilities. We need to remember that. Second thing we need to think about is in 2019, we just passed a referendum. And that referendum was for people. We'll talk about that. There's a teacher shortage. So how do you create a viable future for educators so that they'll want to enter the field? 2 years ago, we ran our school corporation and we had 40 positions that we could not fill. So the teacher shortage is real. It's real for us, just like it is for the rest of the state. We're also interested, as we're talking about facilities, what are the outcomes that we hope for our graduates? You know, it's a very humbling experience when you walk over 1,000 seniors across the stage and somebody hands them a diploma and you sit there and you think, did we do enough for this student? Did we grow this student? What is that diploma a key to open next? We think that we should be doing more in that arena, and then how do our facilities reflect that change? And then, you know, our big piece, we're either the first or second largest employer in the county, Union Hospital and Vigo County School Corporations. We exchange that position depending upon what time of year it is. But how can we be a part of helping attract talent to our community and then retaining them? So this is a slide that just simply says we were at 18,000. 2030, we think we're at 13,000. Our demographic study, though, demonstrates that we believe that that's the floor. That once we hit 13,000, that's where we will sit. That also accounts for probably 800 students that are living in our community but do not choose Vigo County as an option. They may travel out of district and physically attend another school corporation, and that's not in the thousands, that's maybe just over 100 students. What's a bigger threat to us is online virtual education, and we think that that will continue to be a threat to us. And when I say threat, I mean that in terms of our brick and mortar operation. So we need to do some things in that arena as well. Here's just a slide that represents the referenda. The community, there were 23,000 votes cast for the referenda. The referendum won by 54%. And here's what that referendum paid for. What that slide also demonstrates is that we're operating our business in the red. And we needed this 7 million so that we would not experience a cliff, but that we could gradually reduce our operational cost. But if you go back to that, we put $3 million in teacher salaries, bumped our beginning teacher pay up to $38,000. You can see some of the other areas that we invested those referenda, and the referenda goes away in 2027. So that's when we hope to have our budget issue worked out to where we would be operating in the black. Again, just trying to avoid the cliff. I want to think about this in terms of our delivery model. When you think about our delivery model, again, I mentioned that I was a junior in 1983. Delivery model does not look much different from 1983. Funny thing is, it doesn't look much different from 1953. Doesn't look much different from 1933. And so we want to think about our model differently and what fits our local or regional economy, and then what will help our students be competitive when they walk across and grab that diploma. Here's just some slides speaking to those delivery models. It's really set up to do exactly what I'm doing right here. I'll assign you a reading. You will hopefully do the reading. The next day we'll come in. We'll talk about what you read, or if we're in a math class, we'll do some assignments in relationship to what you read. At the end of the week, we'll take a quiz. At the end of 3 weeks, we'll take a test. And then you'll spit back out all of that information that we've worked on. Some of that is very much needed, but some of it is found readily on our phones now. And I can just ask Siri to help me with that problem. And so we envision a different type of environment. We envision an environment where there's great collaboration, where there's problem solving, that students are engaged in those real world types of situations, not a semi-skilled manufacturing economy, but a 21st century knowledge-based economy. So you can see these classroom designs here. This is the exact same classroom. It's just your furniture is able to be moved around and configured in whatever type of learning environment you need to create, which probably means greater square footage than what we currently offer in our buildings. We see makerspace labs. We see areas in which our college-bound students not only understand design, but have the ability to fabricate as well. We are a very center for healthcare here in our region. So how do we take our students and how do we use our entire community as our campus? You know, we're very much used to either getting on a school bus or mom and dad putting us in the car, or when we get our driver's license, driving to school and sitting there for those 7 hours and then going home. We have more resources here than we can really probably use effectively. Right now, we're not using them as effectively as we could. You know, I talk about, we just launched agriculture 2 years ago. When we think about the future, I see our students not traveling to a career center that has agriculture in it. I see them going right to Ivy Tech, who already has an established agriculture program. I see we already do this in the healthcare profession, but how do we find opportunities at St. Mary's and Ivy Tech and Indiana State for off-campus opportunities? And I think this is at the is a piece of our decision in terms of what we want to do with facilities, and that is economic development. I'm just going to buzz through these slides. We're going to start engaging tours in our high schools again when we come back this fall so people can walk through. But what this demonstrates is that our schools have issues. I'd like to show this one slide in particular. This is a South Vico slide. You can see that water stain. I can remember when I first interviewed and they took me on a tour of the high schools and they already had buckets out at Terre Haute South because it was going to rain, and they thought we need to know where to catch that rain at in the hallways. There's a story, I don't know if it's true, if you're a Terre Haute North graduate, it may be just legend, but I believe they actually canceled school one day because it rained so hard and there were so many leaks within the roof. But that's a condensation issue. And that's a design issue, not a maintenance issue. Because this is the exact same hallway, almost the exact same location at North. What it is condensation is gathering. That's not a leak in the roof. That's our heating and cooling system. We graded out our buildings. We had an architectural firm do that. Our high schools did not rank very well. Would not be a grade that we would want to receive in schools. Our North and South received a D, and West Vigo was an F. Probably if you'd removed West Vigo Middle School, West Vigo High would have been a D, but West Vigo Middle School is in some pretty dire straits. Something I also need to speak to is we're receiving a lot of federal funds. In ESSER 3, we received $30 million of federal funding. And so how do you spend that wisely? How do you invest that to where it's a 50-year decision? We just don't go out and buy a bunch of projectors and put them in our classrooms, and 3 years from now, we've just spent that $30 million. So it figures into this equation. 6 million of that 30 has to be spent directly in learning loss as a result of COVID. So we would extend the school day or extend summer school over the next 3 years to try to make up for some of that learning loss. So that leaves about 24 million that we could put into infrastructure systems. And so as we're talking to our community, how do you want us to spend that 24 million? You need to think of it in these terms. If you've driven by North or South, you notice the grass is growing in the paved parking lot. That's a decision we've made right now to not pave. I understand if you were to pave Terre Haute North, that's $1 million. You pave Terre Haute South, and so when we're thinking about renovation or new construction right now, we don't want to spend $1 million and then tear it all up to be building something new here in the next 2 years. So another thing to think about is we service 27 buildings. And just like the high schools are in desperate need, we have elementaries and middle schools that are in desperate need. If you went to Woodrow Wilson, if you think about that cafeteria situation, I think our community we can do better than that. But we have to be able to address those. So we want to walk this situation, not sprint to some sort of decision and then regret how we've spent those dollars. Here's an example. Let's say our project, whatever it is, and this is a made-up number just to give you an example. If we had a $100 million project, that would increase the tax rate 15 cents. But what if you use 24 million of those ESSER dollars to attack that $100 million project? You could then see what the impact would be on the tax rate. So I use that as an example, and I'll come back to this $100 million example in just a second. Very blessed. Our past leadership has done a great job of preparing for this discussion on the high school. What this really represents is, think of this as your mortgage. And we have mortgages on several buildings, and debt is getting ready to fall off. So we're going to have the opportunity to replace debt. Let me tell you why that's important. In Superintendent School 101, what they tell you is nobody ever remembers if you lower your taxes. That's true. You guys know that we lowered your taxes in my first year here. See, don't remember that. Nobody ever forgets if you raise taxes. How many of you knew that we had a referendum that raised your taxes? It's just how it works. So your best bet is to try to keep a level tax rate. I don't believe that will be able to be accomplished if we're going to attack our problem through referenda. But what it demonstrates is from here to here, from 2027 to where we're at today, you have a considerable amount of space to replace that debt. I use this example. This is a 1972 Ford Mustang. I started my presentations out earlier and somebody told me I had a 1968 Mustang, so I flipped it so it would match the year of the high school. North and South were built in 72. This is a 2021 Mustang. And if I were to say, I'm going to give you the keys right now, which one would you take? You might take the 1972 muscle car, looks intimidating. Or you might choose the 2021. Both will get you to where you want to go. We'll both have some advantages and disadvantages when you plot that course of where you want to go. The 1972 has no cup holders. Think about that. Think about how our lives and our automobiles revolve around our cup holders right now. Where would you guys set your coffees? Some of you in the room might be able to remember the one that you hung on your door by your window there that kind of fit on the side there. You might be able to remember that. But that's an example of renovation over new construction. We could put a cup holder in there. We could put a computer system in there. We could make it more fuel efficient, but those are all dollars. And I would ask this, if I gave you the 72, would it be your everyday driver? Or would you park the 72 in the garage and only pull it out on the weekends and drive to Dairy Queen, get your Blizzard and then drive back home? That's a discussion I think we will continue to have. What's important to you? If you have an elementary child, there's probably things that are more important to you than other things on this list. If you have a child that's going to be born in August, it's the same thing. More things that maybe are important to you. But what if you're like 80% of our community and you really do not have a child or a grandchild in school? You really don't have a connection. Then what's important to you when we start thinking about facilities? We think to help answer that question is that we need to engage in co-design, and that is looking for collaborative partners within our community to provide education. Here are two examples. One is a high school in Massachusetts. We believe there's maybe 4 or 5 of these in the country right now. And that's a high school and a senior center that collaborated on a new high school project. When I say senior center, I don't mean 12th graders. I mean those people that have an art card like me. And this community went in and they said, we have needs. The fastest growing segment in our community is our senior population. We also have needs for these academic facilities. How do we go together, spend our tax dollars wisely and build something that has multiple use? I use this Engineering, Technology, and Innovation Center in Elkhart. That's a public-private construction in which advanced manufacturing was important to the Elkhart community. Why? Because they build RVs in Elkhart and they wanted to be ready for that next generation of worker who is going to be building those RVs. So that's examples of public, private, or partners that you normally would not think of. We are engaging in some of that with our community. We would like to do more. So if, capital I, capital F, if we had a referenda, and let's go back to that $100 million project. That's what it's the impact on the tax rate. But in a referenda that builds schools, everyone pays. No one can avoid a payment in a referenda project. If you own a home, that's what the impact is a month for the next 20 years. If you rent, what your landlord is going to do, if they have that handed to them, they're going to hand that cost down to their renters. If you own commercial property, it's the cost a month. You own farmland, that's the cost per 100 acres. There's not many 100-acre farms out there. To give you this example as well, I found this since moving here to Terre Haute, that if Plainfield has it, we want it. So if they have it in their community and we travel to Plainfield to see it, we'd like to have it here, especially if we could co-design a school with a Target. But here's an example of a school built in 2011 in Plainfield, about the size of a Terre Haute North or a Terre Haute South. Brand new high school. That was the construction cost in 2011. This is what we predict the construction cost would be in 2023. I've just shown you what the tax impact is of $100 million, and that's one high school. Let that sink in a little. You can see some other examples as well. So what we've been talking about really for the last 4 months are these 8 concepts. Our hope is by the end of August to narrow these concepts down to 3. Do I have a favorite concept? I do. Will you ever know it? No, you will not. I'm just trying to present the information and discern what our community would like to do with this situation. Then my job is to take that information, make a recommendation to our school board, and then our school board vote to either take that project forward or not. So let's talk about real quickly. On the left-hand side, those are concepts that would be provided in a project. On the right-hand side, those would not. So this is the least expensive of our 8, and it's renovation. There is some new in classrooms and science labs, but for the most part, it's renovation. Concept 2, it's some new, some renovated. You think maybe about a north and south. How many have been in those buildings? So if you go into a north and south, if you turn to your left, that's really most of your co-curricular spaces. So think of that being renovated. And then think of, if you turn right, that goes into your academic spaces. Think of that probably becoming new. 3, this is new high schools built on the exact locations where they stand. One discussion we're having with West Vigo is would they be willing to move from where they currently stand to just north of St. Mary's. St. Mary's has given me permission to talk about it because they have tucked some property away that they have bought there with a discussion of the potential, could a new high school be built there on 150? That was it. That was its original spot before they chose where they did. I've heard a lot of stories about why they moved it from there, one being the interstate access. This is adding an east high school and keeping a north, south, and west. What I would caution you here, this is a very popular concept that's being talked about a lot. Remember, we're closing elementaries. Remember that shrinking enrollment. Now, if the community wants us to do that, we will do exactly that. But there's a cost associated with it that I think everyone has to understand. There's only so few operational dollars, and I just told you we're running in the red. We were very grateful for a referenda that allows us to run in the black. At the end of this year, you'll see a very healthy cash balance, and that healthy cash balance is not any magic we perform. It's that the federal government has given us a great deal of money here that we cannot spend that fast within a year. But this is our most expensive option. Here's a 2 high school model. This is a construction of an east high school, which would be maybe in that Rolls-Holman area, and a west high school, which would be on the other side of the river where West Vigo is. Understand this, if it's a referenda project, unlike in 72 when 4 board members just raised their hands and voted to consolidate all those schools into a north and a south, here, this is a decision that will be decided by the voters. It would say a 2 high school and a 1 high school concept, it's going to be very difficult to convince voters to close the high schools that they attended. You think about your memories, your dreams, you may have met your spouse at one of the high schools. That's a very difficult situation, but again, if that's where our sport. So, questions for me? Lot to unfold there. I did not stay within my allotted time, unless we got started late, which could actually have occurred.
You're okay. There's concept 8. Did you want to go to the cost rankings?
Pardon me? You can, yeah, if you want to go to that slide, we can just hold that up there.
Okay, sure.
Dr. Haworth, you talked about how Union County School Corporation and Union Hospital are the first and second largest employers in Vigo County. So, and you talked about how can we attract and retain that talent here locally. Mm-hmm. What are some ideas that you guys are already doing or planning on doing to do that?
One, we need to continue with our employment status. But we need somebody else to move in and capture that number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 spot. When healthcare and your school corporation are your leading employers, that does not make for a very healthy economy. So what can we do as we think about our missions, either collectively or independently, that helps make our community even more attractive? So I'll just share a concept that we've talked about in public, an essential workers village. How do we help young teachers find their way here, work for our school corporation, but also be able to afford a home? And so how do you engage in that type of discussion within your community? I think also being able to work with our other supporting agencies for education, whether that's Work One, whether that is our local trade unions, wherever that looks to be. If a corporation or if a company looks to locate here, how can we be ready to scale up in 18 months to provide the employment areas that they need? Also, coming out of COVID, how do we become a community that is going to attract people that their home base may be in Indianapolis, maybe in St. Louis, and maybe in Chicago, but they're going to live and work here locally? And then how do we develop that quality of life around our community that will draw those people here? So I think that there are 12 Points is a great example. How do we then start thinking about school differently to do that? I believe maybe because of COVID and coming out of COVID, testing is important, but maybe it's not the most important thing. But maybe our state can say, maybe understanding talent development at the elementary level is important. That those teachable moments when a lesson clicks and a teacher can stay within that teachable moment makes sense, so that we can develop elementary school students that have an understanding of what they like and what they don't like, what are their talents and how can they explore those. And then at the middle school level, how do we start connecting those to possible careers? Not that we're trying to socially engineer outcomes for elementary and middle school students, but the best time to decide that you do not want to be an architect is definitely not your junior year at Ball State. The best time to decide that is when you're young and you have the ability to explore, to capture. And think about how bold we were when we were in elementary. Things that did not scare us, that when we got into middle school or high school, then just terrified us. How do we use that to our advantage to explore those careers that hopefully then will lead to that quality of life piece that will lead to our students wanting to stay here in West Central Indiana?
Thanks.
Dr. Haworth, you mentioned, a lot of the higher ed institutions and possible potential partnerships with them, and, both being in education, that's really smart. But I'm wondering if there's been any talks with private organizations or companies where, there's multi-use partnerships there as well.
Yeah, Great Dane next year, West Vigo High School is launching a pilot within Great Dane to try to create exactly what you're talking about. What are all of the occupations that exist within Great Dane, from somebody that may be working on the floor to somebody that may be working in HR, whatever that might be. So the answer to that is yes. Our most successful ones, though, would be with the hospital we currently have here. So what I envision, hopefully, when we think about the footprint of our schools, are more externships for our juniors and seniors. And so how do we create that opportunity where they're in this exploration phase within high school to determine, this is something that I think I could do or be a part of or grow into. To do that, we need to think about our curriculum. Last year, this is something that we need to work on. We need to graduate more students that have 30+ hours towards maybe an associate's degree, maybe that's to some sort of workforce certificate, those types of pieces. And I think the way we get there is through some great partnerships with our private industry and private partners.
Dr. Haworth.
Yeah.
So I saw that the Good County School Corporation launched like an online school, right?
Correct.
So I was wondering, what's like the benefit of that over like another online school? Because you were talking about online school being a
Yeah.
threat to your brick and mortar, so.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what gets lost is that we launched our online school just 2 years ago. And as you know, as a student, we were not prepared for remote education. You know, we were not one-to-one. We didn't have a student management system. You know, our teachers had not gone through the necessary professional development that they needed. And so when we launched our online school, we were thinking we were at the beginning of what was going to be a long marathon to where we could eventually do this. Here's the answer to your question. That we could outsource to another company the instruction and the curriculum. And then in another phase, we could then start to use our curriculum with their staff. And then in the last phase, our curriculum, our staff. And so my goal would be to disrupt the current economic model for online instruction and create a public school model that fits within the entire state. So let me give you an example. There is a school in up by Muncie, Indiana, that they engage with an online provider. And the public school does receive some financial reward for doing that. So let's use our numbers. A student that's enrolled has a dollar value of about $7,000. So you walk into the school, you have a $7,000 dollar amount that follows you from the state of Indiana through sales tax. Okay. Well, in this arrangement in northern Indiana, a significant percentage of that goes to that online company that happens to be based in Florida. And the local school corporation only receives a small percentage of that. What we would like to be is similar to that company that's in Florida and working within the state of Indiana to provide a quality online experience. And that means something different for a lot of different people. But that also helps protect our brick and mortar. I think last year, even though we had our own online school, I think we probably had 30 to 40 students living here that chose that school up by Muncie. And so we need to create a competitive model to keep those dollars right here. And then bring those dollars from Muncie to here.
Can you speak to what's going on with the programming for what used to be Washington Alternative School?
Yeah, as you know, as a part of cost reduction, we closed McLean High School. And then we closed 2 other elementaries this year. We have another elementary that in our strategic plan that will close at the end of this next school year. And so the programming that was there now has moved to Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington historically has been a school that served young women and some young men where life experiences had changed on them dramatically to where they needed the ability to have some child care plus the ability to stay in school. And so we've moved that programming there. It's becoming a little more blended, so there is some online instruction, but it's still staffed for students that want that brick and mortar. So, but it does provide more of a blended learning opportunity than what it previously had.
Okay, Well, I graduated from Washington and was one of those young people.
Yeah.
And I feel strongly about it because there is a need. So often it is not just almost didn't.
You know, when you think about this past year, I think we were able to graduate 20 students from that program this last year. And you think about the struggles that the traditional student had, and then put a young family component in there. I don't ever see that going away. I believe it just brings so much value to our community.
I appreciate that.
Anything else?
I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So while online education was really very challenging for most people, most students and most educators, I had been wondering if there would ever be a way to do a blended model, in particular for him as he was growing up, because he learns differently. Not in any bad way, he's a straight A student, but during that time, he was able to do so many other great things.
Yeah.
And like learning about coding, developing his custom computer business, but also learning about entrepreneurship and even a more in-depth level that he would not have been able to otherwise. So
Yeah.
I just think that if there is a possibility that's one worth exploring.
And we believe there is. In fact, we've talked about it at 2 or 3 board meetings. It's what we're calling a flex school. And it would be set up for blended learning. But it would also be set up for, let's say there's a homeschool network out there that needs a math instructor. And so could they use that, for whatever reason, they've not chosen the traditional brick and mortar, but our charge is to educate students. And so could they bring their students into that opportunity to have that math instruction, and maybe there's a religious objection, or maybe there's some other objection that, don't want anything beyond that. But we think there's some great opportunities in this flex school. We would not have the same operational cost as a traditional school. Your teacher footprint would be much, much smaller. But we believe that flex school, we do not believe blended learning and online learning will ever go away now. And so we believe there's a market there, and if we do not fill that market, somebody else will.
Somebody potentially based in Florida.
Yeah, on the beach.
And shame on us if we don't see that and respond to it.
I was wondering, because you were talking about having your graduates somewhat of the way toward a workforce certificate or an associate's degree. Is that going to be integrated in the career pathways type thing?
Yeah, I would love for this to occur. That if I'm walking down the hall and there's a sophomore walking towards me, I could go up and say, hey, what pathway are you in? Not what pathway you're stuck or glued to, but what pathway are you in at that moment in time? And you may say, I'm in a healthcare pathway, or I'm in an entrepreneurial design pathway, whatever that might look like. But that you have some idea of how I'm trying to relate what I'm learning to what maybe some of my future goals might be. That's a long march. So I would lay this out in front of our community. And we're working right now on amending our strategic plan that we just passed in February of 2020 because COVID happened. And so things need to be amended. Things have evolved. And one thing that we have discovered is those students that have those 30 hours are far and few in between. And how do we become more intentional about that? So I think you'll hear us talking about strengthening our dual credit in all 3 high schools, not just in the CTE area, but in the academic areas as well. Guys, I can do this all day.
These were good
Talk about
questions. These were really good questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Haworth. We really appreciate it. I hope our recording worked all the way through. My laptop froze maybe once, so we'll see what we get out of that. It might be a little sketchy, but we'll get what we can out there, so.
Just be careful if it did, how you mix that back in.
Yeah.
Everything that I just said is in context.
Yeah. We'll have Katie Shane working on that, so I have zero worry about that at all.
You could splice the one high school concept with something else to make it sound like something totally different, so I'm gonna trust.
We want to have 17 high schools in Terre Haute.
Yeah.
We'll just add that in there.
You realize at one time there were over 17 high schools in Vigo County?
I did not know.
I had heard there
that.
were a lot.
17.
Public and private.
Wow.
I can definitely understand the, like, people not wanting to tear down their high school. Like,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we hear that, like, with the, like, Garfield and
Oh, yeah.
Wiley, like, I mean, people like,
Flyer.
like, are like
But
diehard about their, like, high school. Like,